Okay, well, I guess let's start off here. So I'd like to welcome Rob O'Connor from the Ag and Motion Show here, the show director. I'm Jason Steinle with Dutch Industries, and I've got Connor Pachowski, our territory manager for Northern Saskatchewan and Northern Manitoba, with us here today. And this started out as a phone call to Rob to interview him. As to how the evolution of the farm show has changed over the years and where we were 20 years ago and where we are today. And it turned into us three guys sitting around a round table here and kind of having a discussion about it here. So we'll just talk her through. And why don't we start with you, Connor?
Sure, I'll get it started. So, Rob, Ag and Motion, it's the biggest outdoor farm show in Western Canada. So we're coming up on 10 years of this show. How did it get started, and how do you find yourself in the position of show director?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to go back a little bit to answer this question. So my background, I'm actually from 3 generations of beef cattle producers. So we've had purebred Hereford cattle in our family since the 50s. And we've also lived, my father's family is from Saskatchewan, my mother's family is from Ontario. So as I grew up, I've lived in both areas. So we had cattle in Saskatchewan, we had cattle in Ontario. Also, my grandfather owned a steel manufacturing company. So he actually fabricated a bunch of the sewer systems that are underneath Toronto, a lot of the big silos, like for instance, at all the bakeries that are there, Mr. Christie Cookies, for instance, all those big steel silos were all built by my grandfather's company. And how I found myself into this business is we also owned a farm in Ontario, just outside of Toronto. And I was really excited about the fair industry and agriculture events. So even when I was 16, I got involved on a volunteer basis and started organizing agriculture events for a local fair association or for the junior cattle associations that I belonged to at the time. And we started building those up. Went to Guelph University, finished agricultural business course there. Once I graduated, I worked for an agriculture feed company, so livestock feeds. It was Purina at the time, and then moved to Saskatchewan. And when I moved to Saskatchewan, Regina Exhibition Association had an opportunity to work for them, and of course, that was on the agriculture business and event side of the company when it existed in that form then, and that's kind of how I got into the whole farm show business, is because of what I had volunteered as a youngster, and that helped me to get the job here in Regina. And then from Regina, I moved on to Manitoba Provincial Exhibition for about half a year, and then the opportunity for Ag and Motion came up. And Glacier Farm Media, who owns Canada's Outdoor Farm Show in Woodstock, Ontario, and Ag and Motion here in Langham, Saskatchewan, they gave me a call. And they said, hey, we've got this dream of starting up a new outdoor show in Western Canada. Our company has learned from the investment we made in Ontario at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show. That team is wanting to help create a show in Saskatchewan. And would you join the team and kind of lead us through that? And yeah, so it was a really exciting time because it's a once in a career opportunity to build something that was going to be this significant with a large footprint. And with my experience from all those years that I had at Regina Exhibition Association with Farm Progress Show there, it just kind of helped me to work with that team and to build Ag and Motion to where it's got so far today.
Well, that's kind of interesting. The one thing that strikes me in all that is you're talking about Mr. Christie and you guys made some equipment to use in manufacturing their goodies. Well, at Dutch, we actually we designed a machine for Dad's Cookies, which used to be in White City, and we also made machines to make cookies back in the day. So kind of a funny little connection there. But so today we're 157 days away from the show. I know the planning starts from the second that everybody's driving out of that show to the day that everybody starts driving back in a year later. But what happens I guess as we start kind of tightening up and getting closer to the final the snow's now off the ground, and what are kind of the big things that start to need to come together for that show to hit and be a success?
Yeah, so for the show itself, it's probably, I want to say, a 15-month planning cycle. So even though it's an annual show, I'm already in the process of just starting to build the budget for 2025 now. So that's, we'll get the budget and the rates and everything put together here in the next 30, 45 days. And that helps us to understand, okay, this is what we think we're going to create for revenue for that year. And now this is what we can afford to spend on that show. Because the show itself costs about $1.5–2 million just in costs put on a show. Yeah. And that's not including all the capital expenditures to build up the infrastructure, which is a whole other kettle of fish you got to talk about. Like if you've been to Ag in Motion, you'll see that part of that event center or that property is developed. We have some really good roads. We've got some buildings that have been going up the last few years. But we still have no running water. And so all the water we bring in is either in bottles or in big, large tanks. We don't have any sewage system, so everything is still portable in that way. And, as we grow the property and the show matures, those types of capital investments will be made into the property. Yeah. So then what we do is we talk about 13 months before the show, what we want to talk to the exhibitors, all the companies that participate at the show, and the farmers. What do you want to see next year at the show? Right. And we try to start putting a formula together on what we think that might look like. And then we start talking to the people when they're at the show. So for 2024 this year, we'll start talking to the companies who are involved and the farmers. This is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think about these ideas? And that's kind of what we utilize to start forming up the programming for the next year's show.
Yeah, so that's a heck of an undertaking, right? And so the staff over the years must have grown. We know the show's grown. Like I was lucky enough in November this year to get over to Agritechnica, and you start talking with people about that show before you go, right? And the size of it, right? And you're going to have to take comfortable shoes, and you're going to put on a pile of steps, and it's never ending. And I'm I'm ready, and I get over there. And you walk in the first day, and John Deere alone was in the size of what would be the equivalent of maybe 3 or 4 hockey rinks, right? And it was like, okay, this is kind of a big deal. And I think there was 27 halls altogether, and I think we saw maybe 70% of that show. And you're trying to get through and see everything. And I think we're like 17 kilometers a day we're averaging in our walking, and thousands of steps. And you get to a point where it's like we just in 7 days we couldn't see it all, right? And it was getting big. And so as I was at Ag in Motion right at the beginning. You look at the how much the show has grown over the years. How do you deal with the challenges of getting everybody to be able to come in a day? Because most folks will come for a day, maybe 2 days. How do they get? How do you deal with the size of the show and keeping it at a manageable size where everybody can get through, see everything, and not have to come and miss parts of the show, right? So,
yeah, and that has been probably in our surveys, and it's a nice problem to have. But the comment that we're hearing is the show's so big, it takes a long time for me to get from one end to the other, which it does. I mean, it's 100 acres. And even though we have 8 shuttles out there, the people movers are going through constantly, with just that volume of people, any day can be between 9,000 and 15,000, depending on which day it is. That's a lot of people, and it's a lot of space, and we only have so many people movers to get people back and forth. And so as far as transport, we have 8 people movers. There's about 200 golf carts out there that are rented. So we're doing all that we can, but it is a big show. And what we're doing now, which we've just kind of in the last 2 shows started to put together, is we're trying to theme the areas of the show. Right. So, for instance, the drone companies, we're putting all 8 of those, when they're willing. Sometimes a competitor doesn't want to be beside another competitor, sure. And we understand that. And we make sure that in those cases, there's some separation. Right. But a lot of the time, the companies want to be beside each other, because now you can let your potential customers compare everything, and then they'll choose which company they want to for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
different products, different people that they deal with. There's all kinds of different reasons for a farmer to decide I want company A over company B.
Yeah.
So we're theming the area. So we have Irrigation Alley, which we built last year. We have the new drone demo space, which we built. Most of the livestock-oriented businesses are in the southwest corner. So there's about 90 companies there that all cater to the livestock business. And that is something that we're trying to design to help farmers with. When you come to the show, you specifically want to see something, that's where you can go. And to be honest, I stole the idea from Agritechnica because every one of those halls is already themed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something I noticed when I went over there. And it's actually interesting when you're in Germany and you think, okay, well, I'm going to see the German companies the second I walk in there. Well, I think some guys wag a little bigger stick and get that prime location right out front, right? So when you walk in, they're the first one you see. And if you don't get to the end of the show, well, maybe it's it's kind of like prime parking out front, which in opposed to kind of being in the boonies, right, or further back in the show, which makes it sometimes a little bit trickier. We actually moved. We were kind of central in that show, and we moved over to right up against Highway 16, and it is kind of at the end of the show when you walk from one end to the other, essentially from the parking lot to the highway. And it's actually worked out really well for us because I found that folks come in, they'll come down to the end and then they'll kind of walk down along that walkway, that last final street in the end, and then decide, okay, which way am I going to go back, and then kind of work their way through the show. So we received some really good traffic down there, and it's been really good for us down there as well. So,
well, there's some strong companies that have made that same decision,
yeah,
right? Whether it's John Deere or whether it's AGI.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons we even put the Irrigation Alley in that space too.
Right.
Because we want to make sure that we have good companies spread throughout the show to help drive that traffic too.
Yeah. So have you guys talked about is there a ceiling for the size of the show and how far you're going to spread out? Is that something that you guys have discussed?
Yeah, we talk about it every year. And I think right now, like we have 7 streets that are going from east to west and 5 streets going north to south. And that's probably where we're going to stay for the next few years, unless we have quite a large waiting list. Like if we get to a waiting list, and we do have a waiting list of about 20 to 50 companies, but if it got to 70 or 100 companies, then we would talk about, okay, we have to add another street.
Right.
But I'd really like to finish off some of the other infrastructure in the show before we add more size for that purpose. And then again, if we did add another street, then we're back to how do we move everybody around? Because traffic flow is a really important part of an experience at the show for exhibitors and the farmers. So you can't put somebody here just because their space is available. You got to put some thought into it to make sure, it's best for that company because, who's around them and how do you bring the farmers there? And then also, you don't want to put farmers in an awkward position where, well, I don't want to go over there because now I have to walk an extra 300 feet.
Yeah.
And at a show, 300 feet's a long ways.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So
and you add all the conversations into it too. It turns into a longer trip yet, right? Like you're stopping here and then you're stopping there, and then all of a sudden it's you 10 minutes or 20 minutes has gone by and you stopped at 3 places and you're only 20 or 40 feet down from where you started, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a perfect example is the very first Ag in Motion. I thought we only had 3 streets that year. Yeah. And I thought my job would be I'd go through a street every day.
Yeah.
And with those conversations you have and people starting to understand what the show was going to look like, they wanted to talk about next year. And I only got through 1.5 streets.
Yeah, it's tough, right?
There's only so many hours you're open.
There's only so many hours a day.
And
there's a social aspect to shows too, right? Like that's the one thing that digital shows are unable to provide is that interaction, that face-to-face. And there's such a social aspect to shows that's so important because we can't be hard selling all the time, right? Like when you're selling a product, you want to be like a friend. You want to be somebody that somebody can relate to and trust, and you can't build that trust, I don't think, over a screen. I think you got to do that in person, and that's why I think, for the most part, the good shows have survived the pandemic. And they're going to continue on because people want to be able to talk and visit.
Yeah, they like that interaction, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's a big part to it. So year one, you say we got 3 streets. Obviously, the site is expanded quite a bit since then. Attendance the same. What's some of your other memories from the start of the show to the show we have now?
Yeah, so the show was about 3 times larger than it was the very first year. We did hit 200 exhibitors, and it was a great team that we started the show off with. You know, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the staff from Ontario really were instrumental in getting us some of those strong relationships with their show to come here. And then, of course, some of the relationships I had built, people trusted that this idea was going to work. And then, of course, Glacier Farm Media also had their own customers who had been coming to them and saying, hey, we need a new option in Western Canada. Can you help get something started? And so they brought a group of their trusted companies together. And it took some time, but as I mentioned, we hit about 200 exhibitors that very first year. Now we're just around that 600 mark. And same with space and sizing, right? Like the show's about triple the size it was back then. I think in the whole ag trade show business, like I've been in it now for 25 years, and what I've really seen change is innovation's gone from mechanical innovations to electronic innovations. You know, we're going for how can we get bigger and stronger equipment to now how do we get more precise, and the precision now is just phenomenal. You know, some of these companies where you can actually measure down to the 5-foot kind of radius, it's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, from a technology standpoint, that's what I've seen a lot of change from. On the social aspect of a show, I think people are more open now with actually doing business at a show and talking about their farm. When I started this business, everybody's very protective of their information. You know, it was really hard to get a farmer to tell you how many acres they had and what crops they're planning to grow, what kind of fertilizer you're using. And maybe it's because most guys now have what do you want to call them, a cropping coach or an agronomist on the team. They've already shared that information with somebody outside of their family. So now I think they're more open to sharing that information than they were 25 years ago. It was really hard getting that information 25 years ago.
Well, 25 years ago, you were just getting into some of this no-till farming stuff, right? And so it was kind of proprietary almost, right? You don't want to necessarily tell your neighbor what you're doing because you think you might have a little bit of a competitive edge or an advantage. And, you know, it's interesting now it's adopted across the, you know, across the grain belt, but at that time it was kind of a new thing too, right? And so maybe people were a little bit more protective of what they were doing on their farm, right? And I even see it now too. Like I remember when I first started with Dutch, you'd drive down the road and you'd stop at, you know, start doing cold calls, and you'd stop at one farm and, you know, you'd sit and talk with Bill, and Bill would tell you about, oh, how he's doing this and how he's doing that. And then, well, where were you before you came here? Well, I was just down the road at Ted's place. And he's like, oh, Ted doesn't know what the hell he's doing, you know? And then I'd drive down the road another 5 miles and talk to, you know, the next farmer, and he knows, you know, Bill that I was just chatting to, and oh, Bill and Ted, they don't know what they're doing. This is the right way to do it, right? So I quickly learned there's a lot of different ways to achieve the same thing at the end of the day. And everybody kind of has their own, you know, we're not going to call it secret sauce, but their own methods of doing it that they kind of like to hold on to and protect, right? So,
yeah. And then with the trade shows of with Ag in Motion, I think, you know, just the evolution of how companies are using the show. You know, when they first came, we were in a stubble field, right? It had been canola the year before. It was dust everywhere. There was still canola stubble in the ground, and it was a dry year again. And none of the grass we planted grew. The only green we had was volunteer canola from the year before. So a lot of companies came. They tried us out. They wanted to see what this was about, and then after 2, 3, 4 years, you could start seeing how they understood what an outdoor show was. And that was something that surprised me, because I've been in the business already for about 15 years, and I'd been to a lot of outdoor shows, whether it was Canada's Outdoor Farm Show or Farm Progress Show down in the States. So instinctively, I knew what the show was going to look like. But I was surprised with how many companies didn't understand. Their only experience at a trade show was an indoor show, whether it was Brandon or Red Deer or Regina. And so they were more concerned about the elements. They were more concerned about being out in the dirt. Mm-hmm. And my line back to them was, well, what do you think your customers are doing right now? They're in the dirt.
Yeah.
They're in
Yeah.
the elements. This is what they want to see from you guys, not something on. And now indoor shows are important too, but in the summertime, with this equipment that works outside, show it off to them in an outdoor atmosphere. And after that first show, companies started to figure out, and then the marketing team started to understand, okay, this is what we should be doing to make it look real and to be important. And whether it was a crop input company or whether it was a equipment manufacturing company or a dealership or a distributor, then they started to understand. And now it's become much more sophisticated. But what really caught me by surprise too was how quickly companies needed access to the internet. They needed data.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to SaskTel and we got that Cell on Wheels, the mobile cell phone tower, put on the site. But to do that, we had to invest. Our company, to their credit, invested $500,000 just to bring hardline to the site from Saskatoon.
Wow.
And they knew right away how important it was going to be, and they were right. See, I wasn't quite as quick to say we should invest that money, but the company was, and they invested in getting that hard line there, and it's been successful because now we have got marketing plans that can allow for companies to do integrated experiences where the farmer will go in this area of the booth and they might look at some information and throw a few things down on their cell phone, like in a survey or something. And by the end of their visit, now they have some actual, what do I want to say? Like not a quote, but here's what we can give you, right? Like
Right,
this is
right.
some
Yeah.
solutions to the problems you've identified while you've been in our booth for the last 20
maybe
minutes.
being able to work through something, on a phone or on a screen or whatever it is to kind of help them through that, right? It's just another tool that they have access to, right? Which is definitely key.
And even ourselves.
You need cell coverage to do that. And
Yeah.
when you get thousands of people in one place, everybody knows the phone starts
Well,
going a little bit slower. So
And that's what happened our very first year was the cell phone just crashed because then I realized the cell phone tower is only capable of 1,500 people at a time.
Right.
Well, there's 9,000 people out there.
Yeah.
So we killed the cell phone tower, and actually a poor town of Borden, we had, after our second year of the show, guys telling us we were still getting messages 2 weeks later from people who had called us during the show.
yeah.
So then everything kind of ramped up with the new cell on wheels, and that's been really good. And now last year we're 5G on the property, so that's as good as we can get. So that's
excellent.
been really great.
And we've noticed that difference out there as well. I remember year one, it was, you're out there and all of a sudden it's just like the world kind of shut off, and it's like the wife, all of a sudden I get a text and it's like 1:00, and then that text came at like 10:00, right? And this last couple of years, it's definitely come a long way. So that's helpful.
So one of the special things about Ag in Motion being outdoors is you can have all of your crop plots out there. I myself did a little bit of research work before my job with Dutch, so I know exactly what it takes to get those things in and take them off at the end of the day. You guys have the Discovery Farm out there, so kind of explain the relationship between the Discovery Farm and the Ag in Motion trade show.
Yeah, so when we decided to have Ag in Motion, the company made the investment in actually buying the land. So the first stage is they bought a half section of land. And then about 3 years later, they bought the next half section land. So now we own the whole section. Well, we only need about 160 to 200 acres to put the show on. So what are we going to do with the other 440 acres or so? Well, the best thing we can do is keep farming it, right? Mm-hmm. And what's the best thing for our customers, our exhibitors at the show, and those companies who are invested in their time and space there? How can we improve their experience with us as a company? Well, some of these companies who are exhibiting, they might want to use our property to do more outside of just 3 days. I mean, 3 days is the highlight for these companies, but there's other things that they can show throughout the season. Whether it's equipment working in the field, whether it's crop and crop inputs, and actually comparing some of the different products side by side that those companies have. And so that's what we did. We started with what we called the Field of Excellence. And the Field of Excellence was about a dozen companies who all worked together. And our team worked with these companies to put a plan together. And they all work together with their different products, the different equipment, to put something in the ground, make sure it had a good fertility. They made sure it was sprayed and looked after properly, and then harvested in the fall. And then we've got the results from what that trial was. And it just kind of grew from there to where now we've got about 15 companies now who all take within 5 and 40 acres of land that they, in some cases, they still partner on, or in some cases, they do things separately on their own. So companies like Bourgault or Yara, they're utilizing land so that they can showcase what they're doing throughout the season, and they can bring farmers back to see what they're doing whenever they want.
Yeah, I think Bourgault's done a really good job of that. I've watched their tours through there throughout the years and how it's kind of evolved, and I think that's been a really good tool for them, right? I look back to the year one, and it was you talk a little bit about the transition from the indoor to the outdoor show, and maybe that's not something everybody around here was overly familiar with, right? So you get to this. I remember year one, we get to the show, and there's the big tent. Okay, we get in there, we find our spot. All right, we kind of take our inside show setup and we start kind of putting it together, and all of a sudden everything's kind of starting to get a little bit dusty and dirty, and I'm there. And at that time, we're all wearing black slacks and black like long sleeve shirts, and the next day we're wearing white shirts, right? Like white long sleeve shirts. Well, day one, it was like 30 degrees outside by about noon. It was about 40 degrees in that tent by about that same time. And I remember we all hit Walmart on the way back. And we all came back the next day with our own individual fans, right? Okay, well, this is ridiculous. Next year, we're not wearing, we're going shorts and polos, right? We need to get outside. That's where everything is. And so dealing with the elements, and I know it's farmers are dealing with them all year, every year, right? And so, I think you're right. You kind of hit on it earlier. It's almost a bigger deal for the exhibitors to, I guess, protect your equipment and have a bit of an outdoor show set up ready, and opposed to something different than what you use for the indoor show. But how, I guess, now that you're 10 years in, is that something that people are still really kind of, concerned about? And you got to be aware of it, but is that as big of a deal as it was in the beginning?
Well, I think in the beginning, because people didn't have the experience, that was one of the first things. Oh, it's outdoors.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to rain.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be everybody's biggest concern was the rain. But again, because I had been to other shows, the days that it rains is when they have the biggest attendance.
Yeah.
So just prepare for that. And we saw it this year finally at Ag Emotion. Like other years of Ag Emotion, we've had 20 minutes of rain or 15 minutes. I think one year at 4 o'clock, it started to rain on the last day. So that was a nice way to kind of clear out the site. Yeah. But this year we actually had rain from about 11 till 2 on the first day, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so people finally got to experience what happens at an outdoor show when it rains. Yeah. I think what I'm hearing from the exhibitors is, especially from the indoor exhibitors or anybody who had a large tent, okay, we just changed how we did things because now everybody was inside right here, side by side. So we just changed how we're going to talk to them a little bit and engage with those farmers, and it was successful. So I think now that everybody's gone through that, that comment about elements isn't like it was the first couple of years. Yeah. Heat is still an issue,
sure.
Because we could be 22 one day and 32 the next day. It is July. And dust. Dust's another thing that we hear quite a bit about, and that's probably the second biggest thing on our survey, the second biggest comment we hear. So what we're doing now is we tested some different calcium-type products to put on our roads to try to reduce that dust from the roads. But again, if it's a hot, dry year and we're in a field, essentially, if the ground's dry, the ground's dry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's tricky. There's not a whole bunch that you can really do about it at the end of the day. And I remember that rain from this past year. And the one thing that I noticed that our booth was full. Yeah. Everybody was underneath our tent, right? And we had all kinds of folks in there and some good conversations. And it didn't last long. I think it was 40 minutes. And it was kind of interesting because you looked down the aisleways and it was pretty quiet. And then all of a sudden the sun kind of poked back out and boom, just everybody was like they kind of went into the anthill and then came back out, and it was just business as usual, right? And everybody just carried on. So
yeah, and we actually had some interesting learnings out of that too. So we do have an agreement with DTN to give us some really accurate, up to the minute weather forecasts and things like that. And so what happened was that main part of the rain moved off, and everybody went out of the tents. But there was another cell
it
just
came
half
back
an
again.
hour away, and trying to get people to go back in when the sun was out.
Yeah.
And here I'm getting pings of lightning 16 kilometers away. And it's like, so we had people go out there trying to get people just to go back under cover.
Yeah.
And, we try to get them into the buildings, because actually tents are not the best place to be in
Fair
during
enough,
lightning.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, that the wind or whatever shifted and that never hit us again. We did get the rain, we didn't get the lightning.
Right.
But that was one thing we learned is, holy cow, it's hard to get 10,000 people backed inside when they don't want to be
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They've been cooped up and
Yeah,
they've been let free.
that's right.
Yeah. So I don't know, Connor was kind of curious here. You talked a little bit about it before, but farm shows were kind of a big thing for you as a kid growing up then, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because of we showed a lot of cattle when I was younger. So I've been going to fairs since I was I actually remember coming to the very first agribition in the 70s, and I was only probably 3 or 4 years old. And I still have memories of that. So it's something that was always part of me, was this agriculture event thing. And yeah, it started with livestock, but it's really grown into more than that, where, whether it's Agritechnica or shows in the United States or even the shows in Canada, I go there with a different set of eyeballs now, right? It's kind of, I guess it's what I would say, it's my life. Like, it's not just a job. Hey,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more. I'd almost call it a hobby if it wasn't also the way I get my money. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a thing, right? Like we're all kind of farm kids, if you will, sitting at the table here. And I remember as a kid going to shows with my dad, and you load everybody in the back of the Ford Taurus station wagon, and we're off to Red Deer, we're off to Saskatoon to these shows. And I remember it was always a big thing for Dad when as we're building throughout the year, that, all right, I'm going to head to this show, I'm going to talk to this guy about this, right? And so you start making your lists. And when we were going to a show, there was always the conversation in the car. Okay, we got to, Mom's got the show guide out, and we're kind of figuring out where we need to go. We need to talk to this guy, and we need to talk to this guy, and so now there's been a bit of a change with the access to information, what it is today, right? A lot of that stuff that you can find that information online, or you can figure out how to do it on YouTube or the likes of all that, which I think what's happened, and we've kind of seen it at Dutch too, where it pulls back a little bit, because if you want to kind of start your search there, that's a good place to start it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's getting to the finish line. You want to talk to that person that has that level of expertise, right? And so, there was kind of maybe a bit of a sense that with the internet, what it is, and the access to information, what it is, that maybe people wouldn't be as interested in shows. But you talked about the just the social element, but just the human side of it, right? And that's one thing we work on at Dutch with. We have an On Farm for You program, where a lot of times an on-farm visit will start from an inquiry that starts on the internet, where a guy's searching through the site, looking for the right opener for his machine, and then all of a sudden you wake up in the morning and there's Connor's got an email for a request for farm visit. Come on out to the farm and bring samples, and let's have a coffee and talk this over, right? And so we try and do that on site, but I think that's still something, and you touched on it earlier, but how you kind of keep these people coming to the shows, and I think a lot of it ties to that.
Oh, I think, yeah, absolutely. There's a trust part that I said earlier that I don't think you can get that over a screen, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can I trust something where I could go here and I could buy a pair of shoes, and then I can also buy a piece of equipment, right? Like,
Yeah.
I need some relationship that I can trust to know that what I'm doing is right for me.
Yeah.
And that's where trade shows still really work. Is you can come in, you can get that relationship, find out if you want to trust that company, trust that person, trust that piece of equipment or that crop input, whatever it is, and enjoy it at the same time too.
Yeah.
There's that element where we want to make it enjoyable. That's why we have the beer gardens.
Yeah.
It's because people want to go in there and they want to have a visit with you, because you might be my rep, but you know what? You're also my buddy.
Yeah.
So let's go have a beer and let's go talk about the industry.
Yeah.
So that soft sell approach.
Yeah, and that thing, that's a thing about it that kind of I think helps to draw guys out because it's tricky, right? You get seeding, you're wrapped up in spring, and that's a real busy time on the farm. And then maybe now you're getting to middle of July, and things are starting to kind of calm down a little bit. And it's like, okay, well, am I heading to the lake or I'm heading to the show? Well, all my buddies are heading to the show, and maybe that's some, if I go there, I'm going to see this guy, and then we'll meet in town and hit the Cactus Club for supper or something like that, and then go out to, enjoy the town for the night, right? So it does turn into a very big social thing, and it's, sometimes the guys like to get off the farm and let loose a little, right? So
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the lake because that was one of the issues we were concerned about when we started the show in July. Was okay, this is the time of year where farmers like to go to the lake, and we're going to take 3 days of that. And it worked. And you'll still see today once there is a group that will come with a boat.
yeah,
Okay. And so we actually have an area of the show where motorcycles and boats and RVs can go and park because, cars and trucks are easy to park.
Yeah.
This big stuff with a trailer behind it and a boat, that's something else. But it's funny when you'll see a bunch of guys coming in with a few boats and they'll spend a day or two at the show with their RV and then off to the lake for the weekend. And it
that's
works.
good. That's good.
So you mentioned as a young kid, you're going to farm shows. You start to get more involved with them. You end up spending your career in farm shows. But as that little kid, do you ever picture yourself managing the largest outdoor farm show in Western Canada?
I don't know if I ever imagined leading the largest one, but like I said, I was only 16 and I was already doing a national junior show. I was a co-chairman of that. And even when I was 13, I was putting on dances, farm dances and things like that. So I guess when I was younger, I always knew I'd be in the business on the event side because I enjoyed it. Now, did I ever think we'd get to this level? Probably not, But I certainly always wanted to strive to do the best that I can. So my dad always told me, if you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all. So that's one thing that's always stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
That's something with the farming industry too, is that there's a lot to farming that's not just farming, right? So you look at it, and I grew up on a farm, Connor grew up on a farm, and I remember even my boss at the time when we were looking at bringing on Connor, it was, Connor was a little undecided, fresh out of school, and, he went to school for agronomy, and now it's, okay, where do I point my gun? Where am I, what part of the egg sector am I going to work in? Well, you kind of think that if you go to school for agronomy, it's going to be this, right? And then, so I remember having that conversation with Connor and saying, this is a really good gig at Dutch here, right? You get to speak to farmers. You're talking agronomy the whole time, but and I can tell in the back of Connor's head, he's saying, well, this isn't really what I went to school for. Maybe this isn't exactly kind of where I had pictured myself, right? And I can kind of say the same for myself. As a kid growing up on the farm, I never really thought I'd get drawn back to who I would kind of be overseeing sales for a company that makes openers for seeders and manure spreaders, right? But it has a funny way of drawing you back in the egg industry, doesn't it? And there's a lot of different aspects to it, and so you even see, a lot of the people that I grew up with will have left, gone to the city, and then end up finding themselves back to the industry in some way, shape, or form. And Alberta, and when I was young in the '90s, it was everybody was going for oil money, and then often coming back for the farm, right? So it is kind of funny how it draws you back in, right? And it's a good industry to be a part of for sure.
Yeah, and especially in the Western Canadian provinces,
Yeah,
there's something a little special. Like there's other pockets in the rest of the country,
yeah,
but these three prairie provinces, it's pretty special being in agriculture here.
yeah,
And especially in Saskatchewan because it's the number one driver of our economy. And lots of people talk about oil and gas and they want to talk about mining and everything else, but still the biggest part of our economy is agriculture.
big time.
And that's one of the reasons I came back to Saskatchewan from Ontario was this is what I love, and this is the place that does it and does it right.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I remember as a kid when we were heading off to these shows, and back then it was collecting all this information, right? And you would come home with bags full of stuff, right? And I remember what would happen. And my mom, like I remember as a kid, it was like we get home from the show and mom would, we only had one washroom in the house, and we'd be like, all right, boys, get up there quick before dad goes in there with all of his stuff from the farm, because he's not going to be out for 2 hours, right? And it was, that stuff sat there, all the information from the farm shows, and sometimes he'd even put the combine manual in there, and if he was going to go do some good reading, that was where he was going to do it, right? But yeah, it's still a big part of it nowadays, and you start, one thing that we really notice over, years and years of doing these shows is that the people come back and they expect you to be there, right? They've talked to you last year, and then they're going to come back and chat with you this year. Maybe they weren't ready to buy their set of openers. You had a conversation. They went through the year. They had some struggles. Now they're coming back. Okay, I want to come and see Connor again because we talked last year and I wasn't quite ready to pull the trigger. I didn't want to spend that money. And now it's like, okay, I felt some pain. And not only from the business side of it, but from the social side of it, right? They'll come in, even if they don't need anything, and they'll come in, they'll be looking for you. Well, where's this guy? Where's this guy, right? And so it's, you're right. There's a big sense of community that kind of develops over the years, and it's a great part of the show that makes it more than just the business, right? So
Yeah.
That's funny you mentioned that, because the farm visit I was on yesterday, I had talked to the guy last year at a trade show.
Yeah.
He was looking at this new drill, undecided, didn't pull the trigger then, just recently bought it, and we were talking about openers for it yesterday. So, I mean, it's not a quick thing. It's over years that you develop this relationship.
Absolutely. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so it's, I had one farmer tell me that as we were, we were at the end of our preseason program, and I was kind of calling him, trying to squeeze him. Well, the deal's done tomorrow, you got to buy today. And I don't really need him this year. And I was kind of squeezing him a little bit. And he says, you got to look at this as a marathon, not a sprint. And I remember hanging up the phone, kind of frustrated that he wasn't going to buy the product. And then kind of reflecting a little bit on what he said, and I was like, he's onto something here. And ended up buying some product from us a couple years down the road when he really needed it. But it was starting that relationship and just kind of building it over the years that turns into something bigger, right?
I think that's one of the very first things I learned about this trade show business when I started here in Regina.
Yeah.
Was that everybody wants to have this mentality. We got to make the sales today.
Yeah.
But in ag trade shows, you're making connections that will develop into sales down the way.
Yeah.
And it's probably 6, 9, 12, 24 months down the pipeline where that guy's going to. But they also have to think about the size of the investment he's making in the equipment.
Sure.
Like these aren't $25 pieces that he's buying from the retail store. They're usually hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So to expect him to make his decision in 3 days is probably a little bit unfair to him, because he's going to end up spending probably on a new piece of equipment anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million now.
Yeah. Yeah, the need is not always imminent. So when they come in, a lot of times it's interesting too, even just the habits of a farmer walking into your booth, right? Sometimes he's maybe had a little bit of pain the previous year and he wants to come and look, but he doesn't really want to get too deep into the conversation because he's not ready to buy, but he wants to learn, right?
Yep.
And maybe that need is a year or so down the road. But if I do my homework here today and I go in and I talk to Connor and I feel comfortable having a conversation, he seems like he's educated on his product, in a couple of years or a year or 6 months or whatever the time is, that phone will ring and, hey, I saw you at the show, or hey, are you in the area? Next time you're in the area, can you stop by and bring this and bring this? And a lot of times it does turn into something down the road, and but like you say, it does take time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So maybe to kind of close things off here, I guess if you look back at this show from where we were 10 years ago and where we are today, what's, I guess, the single most thing that you're proud of? This thing probably feels like your baby, right? So it's,
and I've answered this question a few times. It's probably on tape somewhere, actually.
Yeah.
And what I'm actually the most proud of is as well as the show's grown and as well as the site has developed, I'm actually the most proud of the team I have. Now, that team is dedicated to making this show and Canada's Outdoor Farm Show the very best in the country. Yeah. And I'm really lucky because the two shows don't compete. Right, Eastern agriculture and Western Canadian agriculture, there are differences, and the two shows, they kind of represent the agriculture in their regions and the differences. And the staff is all in on making both these shows great. They get in, they understand what the shows are, they understand what the customers are, they understand what the farmers need from the shows. And they've been able to make these, it's really them who made these shows what they are,
Yeah.
you know.
It really does come back to the people at the end of the day. And in any business, in any one of these transactions, any any farm show, it literally it's nothing without the people, right? So,
Exactly. And the good people are good, right? And they're fun to be with. And that's the other thing about our team is not only are they dedicated to the show, they're dedicated to the team. And at the end of the day, especially at the shows,
yeah,
we'll go out
yeah,
and we'll still hang out together as a team. We're friends too. And that to me is special, right? Because you don't get that in a lot of workplaces, you know.
Quality
Now, it's
people make a really big difference.
quality of people, and it's probably more apt in agriculture that we have people like that in our businesses than just some company. But I think that's the one thing that I love the most about the show, and I'll say it again and again.
That's great. That's great. So what are some future plans for the show? What are some changes you plan on making in the coming years?
I think what we want to do is just continue investing in the capital now of the properties. Like I think the show, as I mentioned earlier, is probably as big as we need to get. We can still add some companies by kind of shifting space around and finding physical locations for them. But I think really what we want to do is continue, excuse me, we just want to continue to develop the property so that it's more convenient for people, like that's the next thing.
Right.
yeah, and that's a task in itself too, I'm sure. Right?
Well, it's a big task because it's a lot of money that's invested in things nobody sees.
Right.
If we have to spend another $500,000 in power infrastructure, no one sees it.
Yeah, but they
right.
expect it to be there when
It's
they
an
come,
expectation.
Right?
That's right.
So,
Same as sewers and water. Like you're never gonna see it. You
Yeah.
just expect it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where we want to get to. It'll take some time,
Yeah.
but I think that's the next. And then on the Discovery Farm side, we're really starting to see it start to really fill up good. And this is the first year I think that we sold every acre to companies to utilize for what they want to do throughout the year. And I think that's going to open up some new doors because as those companies want to bring farmers onto the property throughout the summer and the whole growing season, now here's opportunities for us to do more with them so that they can have a good experience. And that's really what we want to do. So we want to have a property, it's a venue for them to have a good experience to do business.
Right.
And then another thing we're going to really look at is, as you had mentioned, Agritechnica is such a large show. They're owned by DLG, which is a huge farmer co-op organization over there. And we do have a really good relationship with them. And so what we want to do is kind of mirror a little bit what they do on the international side and bring more international business to the show. Again, because one thing we haven't really touched on is when you go over to these international shows, for dry land farming, we are decades ahead of the rest of the world. And we need to bring more of the world here to see our technology so we can sell it to them.
Yeah, it's a funny thing when you go over there and you kind of realize that. And the weird part for me is that they've been doing it for thousands of years. And we've been doing it for, 120?
Yeah.
And we are where we are. And just from when I left the farm in the early 90s to where we are today, I remember even stepping back in a Dutch thinking like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Like it's changed so much, right? And, it's just interesting that all of a sudden, in the last 30 years, we're the go-to people on this stuff, right? So
Exactly. It's phenomenal, and I'm glad and proud that we're doing it here in Saskatchewan and in the Prairie provinces. So that's one thing we want to do with the show is start bringing more of those international buying delegations here so that they can see everything at one time. And because we use so much of our land for demonstrations, they can actually see that equipment working too, instead of having to travel here and then travel there and use up all their time traveling from farms across the prairies, trying to find the information that we can probably provide to them in that 3-day window.
Yeah. Well, there's probably about another 100 things that we could touch on here today, but Dutch has been going to trade shows for 40 plus years now, and Ag in Motion is a big one and a real important one for us here. So I just want to thank you for your time here today, Rob. It's been a real pleasure going to that show, and we all look forward to it every year, and we appreciate you coming in and giving us your thoughts and insights on where it was and where it is today.
Well, Jason, Connor, thanks very much. Been a pleasure today.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.
Appreciate it.